Welcome to this podcast that's part of the Startup Onramp Female Founders Program. This program is supported by the Queensland Government, and that makes it possible for us to deliver mentoring, online learning, and cohort-based programs at no cost to Queensland female founders all across the state. I'm delighted to be joined for this episode by Duval, who's the founder and CEO of Marlee. Marlee is a collaboration and performance AI tool for individuals and teams. And Michelle, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the journey that you've been on in building this amazing product. Michelle's a successful entrepreneur and expert on coaching. She's an author of several books on this topic, and her coaching methodologies have been used by thousands of leaders in more than 60 countries. Michelle's used her deep domain expertise in coaching, psychology, and neuroscience to create Marlee. As we said, a software tool that uses AI to give individuals and teams personalized insights to help them bring out the best of each other in a work environment. So, Michelle, thanks for making the time. I want to start by asking you about the beginnings of Marlee. So I know that a lot of the work that you do with entrepreneurs is about motivations and attitudes. So I'm interested to understand, what were your motivations in starting Marlee, or what was previously called Fingerprint for Success?
Yeah, well, having been a coach for nearly too long, nearly 3 decades, I was coaching, elite athletes, screenwriters, movie producers, many CEOs, many founders, and I was deeply frustrated that really only a few people in the world can gain access to that kind of personalized support to help people unlock their unique potential. And that's because, the field of coaching, people, charge fees that are similar to lawyers and accountants. And it's the nature of them being business owners and having to, fund the way that they operate in business. And so it means that I would estimate, and the research that some organisations have done, is that only 2% of the population gets access to that kind of support. And so I want to make that available to everybody. And so it's been a very audacious vision and project for over 10 years of how do we get to the point to enable technology that could basically scale potential.
Yeah. So when you started Fingerprint for Success, was this a highly scalable, automated solution, or were you starting with coaching and kind of, one-to-one delivery of this expertise?
Well, where Fingerprint for Success came from is I'd already had 20 plus years as a coach, as you already mentioned. And I was coaching many founders. So founders at all different stages of business, and coaching founders who were, having, multi-billion-dollar valuations and exits, founders having multi-hundred-million-dollar exits, and then those who are, struggling to raise capital or actually not even making it on the journey. And in that era, we had collected an enormous amount, 15 years worth of qualitative data. And I had a thesis that we had some sort of mechanism to be able to develop some algorithms that would be able to predict and identify, was there any correlation between a founder's attitudes and their biases at work and venture outcomes. And so anyway, we ended up doing a world first qualitative study, and that brought us into market kind of as a side hustle to my international coaching firm, and that was Fingerprint for Success. And yes, it was a scalable solution in that we developed a very small app that was predictive. And it was predictive around founder likelihood to be able to be successful against objective criteria. So we did an initial study out of Australia, and then we studied 55 ecosystems globally with this data. And so when the data came out, VCs, accelerators, different institutions like universities wanted to get access to that. So we launched a very small app. We just had enough cash to launch it, and it took off on its own. And as people started to use it, founders and their teams and VCs, everyone kept saying, so this is so awesome. It's so precise. It's very predictive, but how do I adjust, grow, change? What do I do? And so we came back to the same problem, which was no one can afford it, particularly in a startup. So that was the catalyst for Marlee.
Yeah. I want to come back to that research because there are actually some really interesting insights. And I think some things that are maybe not intuitive for founders. So I want to come back to that. But I also want to understand, like, the transition from Fingerprint for Success to delivery of some of these insights using AI. So, as I understand it, you were working on using AI to automate some of this process way back in, I want to say way back in 2019. Like that's an awfully long time ago in AI time.
Yeah.
So that was cutting edge. So can you just explain like how you got to the process of, or got to this stage of using AI to automate something that up to that point, I guess a lot of people would have said this has to be delivered human to human because it relies so heavily on the individual expertise of the coach.
It's definitely one of the gnarliest complexities around conversational language patterns and the two-way experience of dialogue. And so it's super, super gnarly and super challenging to do. So in 2018, so we were like 2 years into Fingerprint for Success, and we just had request after request after request. How can we get access to what you do, Michelle, with founders, and how could that be scalable? And so in 2018, I went to market to sort of raise capital with a little pitch deck for an AI coach. And literally, 99% of the investors at the time said, Google can't even book a haircut with conversational AI. What makes you think that you're the one to, bring conversational AI into the world? And it takes me back to the very, very early era in the early 2000s when we co-developed a number of linguistic language models to actually facilitate human change. And those language models are very linguistically led by certain language patterns. And we trained that into over, I believe now in the world, it's over, I think, close to 10,000 coaches. And those 10,000 coaches have used it with, millions of people to facilitate changes in business, at work, and in life across every single gamut. And so it's a model that facilitates certain stages that helps people to identify internal changes around their beliefs, their values, their attitudes, identifies steps, helps the individual to have reflective thinking, and then challenges them to be able to make decisions and take actions to be able to make changes. And so it's a genuine dialogue. It's not giving advice.
Mm.
And so the complexity of that really scared the investors, and they were very clear that, and they even said to me, people are not going to be sitting around talking to an AI. Why would anyone want to do that?
Mm.
And of course, we know that that's radically changed. So it
Yeah.
meant that it was very hard to raise capital, and we needed to figure out how to build a prototype without capital. And that's what we did in 2019.
Okay. So building a prototype without capital sounds challenging. And I know a lot of the founders that we work with have this fundamental chicken and egg type of dialogue within their team that says, well, we need the capital to build the product, to get the customers, to get the revenue. And then the investors tell us that you need the revenue to get the capital. So how do you do that?
We had been really fortunate that we had already raised some initial anchor pre-seed funding, and we had such extraordinary evangelists behind us, and that was for Fingerprint for Success. And they were real revolutionary founders themselves who really deeply believed in the power of conversation and coaching to facilitate change. And so that's what propelled and launched Fingerprint for Success into the world. And so we made the decision to double down and show through the prototype rather than try and convince. And so I think that was one of the decisions, was just because the world doesn't see it yet doesn't mean it's not valuable, and we just need to be able to help them to feel it, see it, and get a sense of it. And I'd already been through that journey, because when I'd first become a coach in the world, when I first went out in there and said, hi, I'm a coach, people would say, what sports team do you coach? And the world didn't know of executive leadership coaching. It just was not something that was in the world, let alone personal and life coaching. And so back in, those decades before, I had to help, not only build my first business, but also to help an industry evolve and then help buyers to buy that. And so I'd already been on the journey that, things take time, and sometimes being first is one of the hardest things.
For sure. And so you got the prototype launched using some of that early backing.
Yeah.
What was the reception like? Tell me what that kind of, how that went over in terms of obviously being at the very bleeding edge of
Yeah.
voice AI, conversational AI coaching.
So At that stage, we put it in the hands of a number of our Fingerprint for Success users and did lots and lots and lots and lots of user testing. And we tested it with people who'd experienced coaching, and people who'd experienced it not coaching with me, people who'd been coached by me, and then people who'd never, ever had coaching before. And so it gave us a lot of valuable feedback, and we learned rapidly that people were experiencing an anonymity and a freedom in the AI coaching that even those who'd had deep amounts of coaching previously were finding unique. They felt that because it was an AI, that they could be more vulnerable, that they could be more open, many of them. Some people who'd had like decades of coaching around different areas of their business and life had told me that they had got more emotional with the AI than they had with their coach. And
That's interesting.
it blew us away, right? It blew them away
Mm.
as well. And so we started to see that there was a vein here of the linguistic models and then the anonymity that an AI could provide if people felt safe and knew that there was security and privacy. And so it was a very positive reception right from the very, very first person's hands we put it in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think the types of people that you work with are outliers in terms of business leaders generally? I know I've talked to a lot of people who are working in the kind of AI space
Yeah.
in corporate land, and the feedback, particularly from Australian businesses, is that they really struggle with the adoption of AI, and they're kind of using it a little bit like, people use ChatGPT as a glorified Google search, or they might use Copilot or whatever. Are you seeing that the kinds of entrepreneurs that you work with are at that kind of early adopter part of the curve?
Yeah, I'm not finding that myself, Colin, in Australia, that we're not early adopters. I'm finding that in the spaces of people who have been innovative leaders in other areas, they naturally have been rapid out of the blocks and definitely extending beyond using ChatGPT for search.
Mm.
But starting early on building things, building individual GPTs to be able to automate processes. And then many people more recently in the last 6 months, we're learning a lot more about them experimenting with agentic systems now that there are some platform tools that make that a little bit easier. Still not easy. But making it a little bit easier. So I think that we in Australia have a lot of early adopters in entrepreneurial companies, but also inside of really large enterprises. There are a number of highly innovative entrepreneurial people who are running a number of experiments. Like I'm super impressed with KPMG and what KPMG have done with their incredible agentic system that's just come out in the last couple of months. They are rapid, first to market to this incredible enterprise integrated system. It's exceptionally impressive. And how fast they have done that and how quickly they've got out of the blocks is outstanding. So I think there's an enormous amount that's occurring. Then you've got the smaller businesses, sort of mid-market and smaller, who aren't venture-backed. And I don't know that they're not innovative and early adopters. They're overwhelmed with doing business. And so
Mm.
carving out time to invest, outside of delivering customer work can be super challenging. And so those who are able to work on their businesses and have enough abstraction to be able to lead that way, I'm definitely seeing a leaning in.
Yeah, well, that's encouraging. I think for a lot of, a year ago when we ran pre-accelerator programs for groups of founders, maybe 1 in 10 was working on something AI related, and today it's 8 or 9 out of 10, and
Yeah.
all of them are using AI in one way or another. So it's really interesting to see that rapid adoption happening. In terms of your growth of Marlee and the kind of rapid adoption, I gather that you've now got users in something like 90,000 organizations worldwide.
Yeah, so we've got 96,000 teams are using Marlee in 70% of the Fortune 500 companies and 90% of Fortune 100 companies in 196 countries. And
It's incredible.
we adopted a freemium user acquisition model, so that real product-led bottoms up, and that we learn a lot. There's some wonderful playbooks in Australia for product-led companies. And so we've been very fortunate to have some advisory and support from some of those companies. And we've also had to go through our own pitfalls and lots of learnings. But yes, making our product for us and what we do free and having individuals and teams adopt it from the ground up versus a top-down enterprise sale has been crucial for our AI product.
So is it effectively the Atlassian land and expand model?
Yeah, that's exactly our model of an individual start to use it to either understand themselves or to be able to understand a colleague or a teammate, and then they invite their team in to do that, and then they start to use it in the flow of their work. It might be how they onboard their team, it might be how they design engineer playing to the strengths of their team members, it might be how they embed it into some learning and development programs, but mostly people are embedding it into their business operations for how they actually achieve company goals and priorities. And so then once, multiple teams are using it, we then now go in and support them to use it more effectively. And that's where an enterprise plan comes on board.
Yeah, fantastic. In terms of the kind of fueling of that growth, has that been customer led? I know you've raised some funding and from some pretty impressive investors. I know it includes people like Malcolm Turnbull and the Canva co-founders. How critical has that been to the growth and the rapid scaling?
Well, back to that early part of the journey in 2018 and 2019, when VCs were really still not aware of what was just about to break in conversational AI only 4 years later. And it was these really visionary individuals and founders who really valued how teams work, how teams communicate, how teams collaborate, that could really see where AI was going because they're so visionary themselves in their own companies. And so without their visionary ability to say, we can see this immediately from the small prototype we built, we wouldn't have got it off the ground. So that's a really great example of other visionary founders supporting innovation, visionary things that others can't see yet. So it's been absolutely instrumental, Colin.
I want to ask you about some of the insights from your research, because I know that you said before you've really got an incredible data set that you've assembled over something like 15 years, looking at personality and behavioral traits of entrepreneurial leaders in different stages and different types of organizations. I'm interested to understand the kind of things that can be changed or not changed. And I know you make a distinction between personality and behavioral traits of leaders, and then the attitudes and motivations that they have, and that they can work on over time. Can you just unpack for us a little bit of the kind of what is changeable and what is not in terms of the way an individual functions as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So in psychology, personality is mostly considered fixed. And then there's a subset of personality, which is around the areas of motivation. What we measure in Marlee, and we've been measuring this for over 25 years now, actually, with various different data and tooling and algorithms that we've acquired, is that motivation is changeable. So motivation is a preference, it's an attitude, it's a style, it's something that gives you energy. And so it acts like a bias. And so inside of a motivational science, we have, we measure 48 different motivational biases, and it acts like a filter. So if I've got a strong bias for something, I'm a homing beacon and I zoom in on that. And if I've got a lower bias, it doesn't mean I can't be skilled or effective at those things. The behavioral part, I can do them. I'm not motivated, I don't get energy from them. So, for example, one of the findings that we found of very successful founders is they have a very high bias for abstract, big picture thinking. And it means they don't need concrete details to understand something. They grab it quickly, they join the dots, and they see the bigger view of things. And they've got a very low focus on concrete specifics and details. Now, as you'll know, with all the founders you work with, founders can be very pedantic and very, very detailed. But if they spend their whole entire day in that without being in the big picture, it's very draining, it's very exhausting. And so we found in the research, was that founders who have a very big picture bias is correlated with more rounds of venture capital, correlated with bigger ambitions. They're the ones who are launching global first startups. They're able to scale the companies. They see bigger scale and achieve bigger scale, and it's correlated with higher valuations at exits. What we found with the bias for detail is that it's the X factor for founders is a very low focus on detail. And then what we see is it's that high detail is correlated with early stage venture failure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I must say, I see a lot of early stage startup founders or teams who are working on something that might in the future become a startup.
Yeah.
And I encourage them to explore this and to think about, looking at the kind of work that they've done in the past and the way that they like to function individually and as a team. Do you like to have a 5-year plan? And do you need to, to have a whole bunch of kind of formalized decision-making processes?
Yeah.
And I think that's a red flag, isn't it? If people are strongly motivated to kind of function in that way.
Yeah, it's really curious that you've observed that yourself. So the high detail is correlated with early stage venture failure. The other one that we found which exactly relates to over-optimizing on planning, is what we call high structure. So a bias for high structure wants to, when they come into a situation, step back, do a plan of how, what, when, very detailed, spend all the time on the planning without doing any validation. And so one of the things we measure is structure. And the other thing we measure is what we call a high bias for use, which is experimentation. Now, it doesn't mean you don't end up with a plan, but it means where does your energy go first? Do you want to invest in figuring it out and validation, experimentation, or investing in the plan? And we found that a high bias in a startup for structure is correlated with early stage failure. But what we then saw for the scaling up phase, because we've done 2 studies and regularly update the data on these, scaling up is the phase, after Series A probably. And we've got product market fit. We've got enough capital. We've, validated the business model. We're now ready to scale. Is that as all of those team members start to join and the systems need to scale, that structure needs to actually increase. And very often in that vortex there between startup and scale up, often the founders have become so identified with being lean, being nimble and having no structure, no process, no rigmarole and bureaucracy, that when it comes time for increasing just a bit the level of structure, they balk at it. Their advisors on their board have to wrestle them, and some cannot actually scale themselves to change that bias. And that's often why founders can sometimes struggle to scale.
Yeah. And I've seen some companies that have successfully transitioned by actually swapping out the founder from the CEO role into something else and bringing in someone who is, more suited to that kind of more structured part of the business growth.
And just to that point there, Colin, when those of you listening to this podcast get through all your milestones in the startup phase and then you're in the scaling, is that one of the other reasons it's so hard in a scale up is that the people you want to go and bring in who have domain expertise, who've worked in larger companies, who've done and been a part of a larger scaling process, they will come with, if they're like a Series B or C company, they're going to come with much greater process, documentation, structure, etc. And it may be way too much for the stage that your current startup is at. And being able to identify how much that person's bias is for structure can be groundbreaking in those early hires after an Series A round, to know, is this person going to just flood us with too much structure too early? Are we going to be constantly in friction over the right amount of structure?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if I look at the founders that I've worked with, they're almost always very early stage companies, sometimes just literally working on an idea. Sometimes they've got an MVP or they've got, some early customer traction. But if I look at the ones that have been successful, there seems to be, and this is anecdote more than any kind of quantitative measure, but there seems to be a pretty strong correlation between success and an ability to just get shit done and to not be too concerned about launching things that are imperfect. And like you say, a bias towards action. And if I look at, I can think of several examples of founders who, if I would, meet with them each week and, check in on their progress, every week they've just done a whole bunch of stuff, and some of it's imperfect and some of it they'll end up backtracking, but it seems to be this, it's almost I'd probably describe it as an unreasonable level of optimism, but balanced by an ability to be rational at the same time. So not an irrational optimism, but certainly a view that says probably what I'm doing is heading me in broadly the right direction. Does that line up with your research?
So we found, you used the words bias for action. It's one of the things we measure. It was one of the key findings from the research was that successful founders who get through those very early stages, but even on the scaling up, they have a very, very high bias for action. And what that means is they're happy to take a first step without knowing the next steps, and they're happy to learn from the first step. So it doesn't mean they don't reflect and learn. It means that they have what we call self-efficacy. I'll figure out the next step. I only need to know this next one immediately. And so it really propels them. And a bias for action was correlated with more rounds of venture capital, correlated with greater sizes of exits and valuations. And so it's one of the most crucial findings. And it's one of the things that we particularly see with the younger generations coming through that is not there. So we've done recently, we published a massive 25-year study on the different generations at work and looking how are we as humans evolving and changing from baby boomers, Gen X to millennials to now Gen Z. And we've got this declining process that baby boomers are the highest out of all generations for bias for action and big picture thinking. And then as we get down through the generations, when we get to Gen Z, we in the scale that we have at Marlee, which measures percentiles, Gen Z overall is, only in the top sort of 10 to 15 percentile for initiation. Wow. And so we're seeing this real paralysis and this pausing and not confident to take the first step. And
that's worrying.
It is. We're predicting at Marlee from the data that we've got a serious leadership deficit for the next decade as Gen Z starts to now move. So Gen Z is from age 16 today. We're in 2025, obviously, when this is recorded, to 29, and so they're starting to move into some early leadership roles, and some of them are running companies. And big picture thinking and initiation is a super crucial skill for leadership.
Yeah.
Yes, a serious issue, Colin.
I've read a bit about agency, and it seems like there's I don't know if it's an age difference or if it's cultural, but there certainly seems to have been a drop-off in this kind of sense of agency where individuals feel like they can influence the world around them. Maybe it's just the way the world's evolving. But I think that seems really important, that people believe that they can move the needle, as it were.
So one of the other things we measure is to your point around agency, is someone's conviction to trust their own point of view and to have their own core values and make decisions against their own point of view without needing external influences, advisors, mentors, or data. Now we know that the world is shaping all of the younger generations because Gen Z was the first on the mobile phone, first on social media, first to onboard into university or leave university in the pandemic, to then onboard into work in a hybrid environment or remote first. And so there is a real not trusting oneself. Now, the upside of what that generation brings is they're very much got an organic approach, and so they move with organic rhythm, so they're much more in tune with nature and flow and how things move. And so there's some sort of benefit evolutionary wise that's coming from that generation, but for those who want to go into entrepreneurship, and they are doing and building startups right now, there's a risk that you will lean towards those biases if you're in that generation, and take too long, be too organic, wait for perfection versus coming out the blocks with the agency, as you said, Colin, with high initiation and drive, take the first step, learn, iterate.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess the practical question from all of that is, for somebody who's in the early stage of exploring a startup, or maybe forming a team around something that they've launched, what can people take from all of that in terms of, firstly, decision making? Should I be an entrepreneur or should I not? should I join a team with this other group of people or not?
Yeah.
And then I guess the other part of it is, well, okay, if you've made the decision to be an entrepreneur and you're often at the races, what can you do in terms of improving your chances of being successful? Based on some of those insights.
Well, I think we're at just such an extraordinary time for any founder. The barriers to creating a product are so low, the lowest they've ever been. So being able to just trust yourself to experiment and to give it a go. One of the things we saw about the younger generation is that they actually do have a bias to experimentation. Lean into that bias is the first thing. But then really the real future is more collaborative than we've ever seen before. And that's collaboration with AIs, so agents that we're going to be working with as our teammates, but also then finding your complementary equal who has the natural biases that you don't have. And so we're going to be in an era of, team human to AI collaboration, but also our human collaboration is going to go to the next level. So understanding what are your natural biases, what fuels you, what gives you energy, and giving yourself permission like any of the top performers in the world. So if we go back to my early journey of coaching, Olympic athletes and, people who've got Academy Awards and that, they're just people who've said, I've got this little talent. And they've given themselves permission to give it a red hot crack, right? And then they've surrounded themselves with the best people in the world who complement them. And that's what unleashing potential at scale means is this is my thing I love and my unique purpose. When you know that, find the complementary people who have theirs and then surround them. And that's, I guess, if we circle back to why Marlee exists, and you can do all of that in Marlee. You can go in, you can create there's lots of templates in Marlee, and you can go in and say, and use the X Factor models for startups and look at yourself and benchmark yourself and then say, hey, does my co-founder have this complementary piece? That's that's lovely about what Antler does with their matching process and how they work is they go and get a complementary co-founder that complements you. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point because I see a lot of founding teams where the team is quite homogenous. You might have people who've got, they've all worked in the same organization, maybe in similar roles, and they know each other, which is probably a good thing because they know they can work well together. But if you look at the skill set and the kind of attitudes towards things, how much homogeneity is good, and how much does it actually, hold people back?
Yeah. So having had the honor and the privilege of coaching some of the world's genuinely most successful companies in the world that were startups on the journey, what I've seen is that core values alignment is where you want some homogeneousness. You want homogeneousness, if that's a word. You want there to be you want there to be alignment in the core values that you have, and also with the mission and the goals for what you have. If you've got co-founders who one wants a quick exit and the other one wants to build something that will last and transform the world, you're going to have you misaligned from the get-go. And the same with your investors. If you've got investors who want early out exits and you're building for the long term, or you've got a business model that's not aligned with that, you're going to have conflict. So spend the time on alignment up front. So that's the part that we see is correlated with successful, enduring co-founding relationships. But what we see is in the co-founders that are the most successful, they have complementary skill sets, and they actually are very different also in their thinking styles. And so that difference creates critical thinking, creates better solutions, and it's not easy. There's more friction in those teams. But what other research has found, Harvard research and other studies shows that the most innovative teams and those who make the most enduring, well-evaluated decisions have least homogeneity in the team. They're the most different and diverse teams, diverse ages, genders, nationalities, very diverse, and they make the better long-term outcomes. But it won't feel as easy, but they'll achieve more satisfying, compelling, and more innovation and success.
Yeah, so I guess it's helping teams to avoid groupthink, where they all kind of nod along and say, "Yep, that sounds like a good idea," without the kind of critical testing. One of the things that we always do with founders that we're working with is a little simple founder alignment exercise, and I'd be interested to see. I suspect the learnings that we've had are similar, albeit mostly anecdotal. And the purpose of this is to get founding teams to ask, I think it's 3 questions. The first is, why are you doing this startup? What's your motivation? The second one is, what are you willing to put in? Time, money, reputation, whatever. And the third one is, what do you want to get out? And we ask people to quantify it if possible. Is it money? Is it how much money? Do you want to pay yourself a salary? Do you want to sell this company for $1 billion? And put some timelines on it. And it's a fascinating thing to watch founding teams do this individually, like they complete it individually, and then they come together and discuss. Sometimes the discussion's really great, and they get together and they say, wow, we've really got some really good alignment here. And sometimes they say, wow, we've got, very different perspectives on what we're doing here.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most crucial things. I'm so glad to hear that you give tooling and facilitate a conversation like that, because most people don't realize what it's going to take to found and get through all the hurdles and milestones in a startup. And it really is one of the hardest things that you will ever do. And people hear founders talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they don't realize how genuinely, and it doesn't get any less hard with scale. So you look at some of the most successful founders in the world who've achieved raising lots of capital, and their product is, they're in billions in revenue. It's just different challenges that happen, and you have to be able to grow and rapidly scale yourself. And it's really, to me, is that alignment, keeping alignment, and how rapidly you can scale yourself.
Yeah, interesting. Can we talk about blind spots?
Yeah.
I know you've done a lot of work on this topic. One that I've got a personal interest in is coachability. And I guess it comes back to what we were talking about earlier about an ability to back your own judgment and say, well, I'm going to take action, but balancing that with the ability to take on board inputs from either your co-founders or your customers or a coach. What have your learnings been in terms of how coachable, or how much it matters, how coachable an individual is?
Yeah. Well, the research found that most successful founders have a low focus on external input. And that means that if someone comes and disses your idea and says you can't, we're not going to back you, you can't raise money for that, that doesn't stop them, right? If you're high on needing external validation, as soon as someone says that won't work, you can't do that, you give up, right? Because you're like, oh, someone else externally said that. And even if the first data says that, you might even give up. And that might be the right decision. But if you've got a strong conviction, the founders who've done the most revolutionary things in the world have a very strong internal reference, and they're low on that external reference. And when we look at the coachability in the early stages, the most successful founders are not that coachable.
Okay.
They've got a conviction and they're like, okay, you said that, but I'm doing this, right? That's not coachable. Sure. And so that's in the very, very early stages. And that's about getting into market and, validating the idea or the business model or the product or whatever. Now, then when we look at the scaling up phase, that's where coachability becomes absolutely important. Building a board, getting the right advisors at the right time, having different advisors for different things, being able to bounce things around, to be able to take feedback from your co-founders around how we're going to shape the culture, how we're going to do these things that actually needs collaboration. And so on the scaling up phase, coachability is important, but in the first phase, what's more important is that internal conviction and drive, and coachability isn't the most important thing, which accelerator programs don't like hearing.
I was going to say that explains a lot about the challenges that I face on a daily basis, but there you go. Yeah, interesting. I'm interested in your advice generally for early stage founders or founding teams. Have you got any practical tips for people who are in the first, let's say, 6 to 12 months of launching a new venture, things that they can do to either help get that team composition, as optimized as possible, or just make a good start on getting their product out there?
Yeah, if we go to the team composition, even if you're just a sole founder or a co-founder, and by the way, to any of you in the world, the way that VC works, and often accelerator programs as well, as they really value co-founders because it, distributes risk. And it's an amazing way to get traction early on. And so when you've got 2 or 3 people or more who are not on a salary and they're all boots in and everyone's aligned with the stage of life and what they want from the business, the amount of traction you can get early is extraordinary. Interestingly, the data shows is that co-founding teams and sole founding teams in the long term do about similar. And so that's a really interesting finding. But irrespective of whether you're sole or whether you're got a team, you're always going to a co-founding team. You'll end up with a team. And knowing your weaknesses and your blind spots is probably one of the most crucial things. That if you're unaware of your blind spots, they're the things that will cause your business to fail. So being vulnerable, being open, learning constantly, self-reflecting, utilizing tooling like Marlee to be able to identify those blind spots, listening to the feedback around you about your blind spots from extraordinary programs like Startup Onramp, and a small group of advisors who've been there and done that. Doesn't mean you have to follow it and take it on board, but seek it so that you at least know your blind spots. And that's going to be absolutely crucial. Then find people to join your team who complement you. So you play to your strengths. When you play to your strengths and they play to your strengths, oh my gosh, the traction is extraordinary. But if you're not surrounding yourself with complementary people to you, you're slowed down. And in a startup, speed is the most crucial, not the most, but one of the most crucial things.
Yeah, for sure. What about challenges for female founders? If you look at the stats on the amount of venture capital that goes to female-led businesses, it's pretty it's a pretty sad story, really. It doesn't show a lot of opportunity for female founders if you just look at the numbers.
Yeah.
But what's your advice for female founders in terms of overcoming any obstacles?
Well, the interesting thing is when you look at angel investment and venture capital as 2 different sorts of investment, we've got and a lot of angel investment is from founders who've exited it or who are deploying capital in that way. There's lots more access to capital. So I think be relaxed with that. And there's so many founders, male and female, who are supporting the next generation of founders. And they are really great at opening doors and advocating and supporting you. And so it is a genuine reality in VC that it's a really different playing field. I was thinking back to 2015 when I first went to Silicon Valley, and it was an extraordinary era. VC's changed so much since then. And I remember I got an introduction to a really awesome founder and Stanford professor who's deeply connected to all of the Silicon Valley company. His name's Joel Peterson. And this is in the era where you'd have a 30-minute meeting with that person, and they'd set up meetings for you across Silicon Valley. And it was an extraordinary experience. You'd meet all the partners. They would be looking for, any great founder. But in today's VC world, you meet an analyst who's got a checklist.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? It's just a whole
different... At some point, that analyst is going to be an AI analyst, right?
Exactly. So the key to this is to realize that you've got a lot of people who want to support you, whether you're male, female, or have any other diversity of any kind, and that it's all about finding people who align with your vision and your idea. And there's always people out there for that. And yes, you'll get lots of knockbacks, but whether you're male or female in the venture capital stage, you're going to get, most people have 100 or more knockbacks. That's just the thing. And when you don't personalize that, you learn from each one. Melanie Perkins and what she shared, she's got a beautiful blog that she shared about her journey, is she just used, and she's just such a great example of that, every pitch, whatever knockback was, what it was, improve it until, you only need one to lead you around, and then you can actually start to fill around. So be persistent, don't give up, use that internal conviction. And yes, in venture capital, it may be harder, but it doesn't mean it's impossible.